If you want to know the truth, Putin is bombarding us with a bunch of lies. We're getting a bunch of nonsense from Putin. If you want to know the truth, he has always been very polite, but it turned out that it doesn't matter at all. Urgent. A sharp statement from Trump on Putin. Are the U.S. really resuming arms supplies to Ukraine, and what is currently happening at the front? We'll talk about this with Roman Svitan. Roman, glad to see you. Thank you for finding the time. I wish you all good health. Friends, go ahead and like this video and also share your thoughts on the topics we'll be discussing throughout the broadcast. It is very important as we have a thinking audience, and with your support, more people will watch the video. And we are also interested in your thoughts on Trump's statements and the situation on the battlefield. Leave your thoughts under the video. Roman, we are starting with the statements from Trump, the U.S. president, which he made the day before about Putin bombarding a lot of lies. We heard this in his speech. It sounds nice, but in reality, it's empty talk. We are preparing for serious sanctions against Russia. Trump assured this. Roman, how do you perceive such statements, since traditionally we also talk with you about a possible change in the rhetoric of the U.S. towards Russia? Now, Trump is quite harsh towards the Russian dictator. What does this mean? How appropriate is it to talk about a change in direction in rhetoric? In your opinion, should we expect a renewal of the supply of armor? Yesterday, Trump was hugging Putin. Today, he's fighting. Tomorrow, he'll be hugging again. We cannot keep up with this policy of Trump. And there's no point in reacting, especially to the rhetoric. They are a sweet couple. They argue sweetly, just teasing each other, because who knows what will happen tomorrow and the day after. We have our own thing to do, and until Trump acts, there's no point in paying attention to what he says. And there's no action at all. They stopped arms transfers to us that Trump had nothing to do with. This is last year's appropriated aid from the United States Congress, the people of America. Trump could only stop her, and further tell the tale that he would give it out by the teaspoon, nothing more. So from rhetoric to action when the Trump team moves, but not this one. This team is not going to move. This is a slightly non-pro-European team that Trump brought in. This is a Middle Eastern team. For real actions to happen, actions we could rely on and somehow plan, at least joint operations or at least supplies to our side, we need to wait until Trump replaces, or the American people replace, the administration in the White House with the one that was there when Trump first came in. He had capable people then. Graham was a supporter, and of course Pompeo, Bolton. I mean, there was a whole bunch of Reagan-type statesmen, I would say. And that's quite different from the way the Middle East problem is going now. The administration will be replaced, smart statesmen will come back, then we can predict some operations. But right now, it's just talk. At the moment, he got rattled by Putin. Tomorrow, he'll turn back to Putin, and they'll be kissing even more happily. There's no point for us to watch that. But for the sake of objectivity, let's recall that there was information from the U.S. State Department stating that the United States has resumed arms supplies to Ukraine. We remember such a statement from the day before. You're talking about concrete steps. How appropriate is it to say these are the first steps? What's your analysis? Also, the Wall Street Journal writes that Trump is considering transferring another Patriot system to Ukraine. The floor is yours on that as well. It's an old bureaucratic trick. First threaten some topic and then bring it back to the way it was and present it as a great action. That's what we're seeing now with the actions of the State Department, including mostly pro-Trump. At least these officials who are spelling out these kinds of actions are Trumpists. So at this point, nothing has improved, not even back to square one. Only the rhetoric has changed, but it's not an action. Last year's supplies came in, they were stopped, and now they are trying to pass off the restoration of those supplies as a great participation in the war against Russia. Once again, we have heard it many times, seen it. We know such moves of officials from the government, who try to sugarcoat their participation somehow. No more than that, so far there is no real action, precisely action to increase or to decide to transfer new arms shipments to us. There is not even the beginning of this process. Does anyone know that Congress has begun the process of deciding on the allocation of military aid to Ukraine? Nothing? There are talks about restoring a previously allocated one, nothing more. For now, it's not worth perceiving all this in a negative light. The marker will be when Trump removes, like he removed Musk, when he gets rid of all that Middle Eastern riffraff and brings in Americans. With Americans, he'll make America great. He'll never make it with the Middle Eastern riffraff. Friends, what do you think about this? Leave your thoughts under the video. Support Roman Svitan's analysis with a like so more people, including those in temporarily occupied Russian territories, can see it. Continuing the topic of Trump. CNN recently published articles stating that during the presidential campaign, when he was still a candidate for president of the United States, Trump promised to destroy damn Moscow. Interesting rhetoric from candidate Trump. Here we need to distinguish between President Trump, candidate Trump, and businessman Trump. How do you perceive this material, such publications? Can Trump really talk about the destruction of damn Moscow in that period? And how much should we expect similar words from Trump? That's exactly what I'm talking about. The day before yesterday, he wanted to destroy Moscow. Yesterday, he was embracing Moscow, ready to come to May 9th. Today, he's ready to help destroy Moscow again. Tomorrow, he'll be hugging again. He's being tossed around by these waves of rhetoric, and they are completely opposite to each other. So how do you treat it? As a psychiatric problem? Nothing else. Treat him, let his doctors treat him. Once again, the best option is to bring Republican-funded statesmen back into the Trump administration. As long as there are street vendors with Trump, there's no point in hanging out with them on these waves. It might make you nauseous. At the very least, there's a gag reflex to Trump's statements. Let's move on to other topics. We have information from the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, Kovalenko, that the Russians want to maintain the intensity of the war until 2027. This was confirmed by the CCD and the NSDC. Roman, help us understand. What level of intensity are we talking about right now? Why does Putin need this? How realistic is it that he actually has the capabilities and resources to maintain such intensity? On the one hand, we say that the Russians are running low on resources, and then we come out with material saying they're trying to sustain this intensity for several more years. Here's your analysis, your warnings, and do you think Putin will succeed? As long as Russia will have pipes working and tankers running, they will have the resources to carry out any kind of actions, both offensive and defensive, and in the swinging mode, whatever they want, because money has the property to fulfill a certain task if it is invested somewhere for this task. So, as long as he has it, he can wage basically an endless war. In order to stop the fighting by destroying the Russian army, by destroying Russia, you have to destroy the Russian economy, the mechanism for getting that money. Burn the pipes. This is the best option. Moreover, the sanctions that European politicians and some American politicians, including those in the United States, are currently dealing with, they will put some pressure on Russia, but it will be non-destructive. They're the opposite. They come out of this pressure stronger, because they have to work in tight conditions. It does not seriously affect the combat capabilities of the Russians. but the direct destruction of the pipes that carry petrodollars, meaning oil and gas. And the production mechanisms, that means destroying the refineries. Shipments, that is, the destruction of the Novorossiysk and Ust-Luga ports, where Russian hydrocarbons are transshipped. That's the main thing, and until this is done, the Russians will have an opportunity. And until 2027, and until 3027. And if we start destroying them, by the end of 2025 they will no longer have this opportunity to receive petrodollars and to carry out military operations, or at least to increase their intensity, which we are now seeing. Let's talk in more detail about Russian resources, because recently we saw the largest drone attack since the beginning of this full-scale war. During the night, 728 drones and 13 missiles attacked Ukraine. This was officially confirmed by the Air Force. In my opinion, our air defense worked as effectively as possible. But let's be more detailed about the drones, because at the beginning we said that 1,000 drones is a very complicated process for the Russians at one time. Now we have 728 at a time. Roman, your analysis here, what does this mean? How much resources do the Russians have to launch 700, 800, 1,000 drones? What chance do we have of defeating such attacks? Let's be objective here, because there is a large number of Shaheds, a large number of other drones. And how does it affect our air defense? We were talking about attack drones. There were about 300 of them, and the rest are decoy drones. They can produce tens of thousands of them and send them off to nowhere in particular, which is basically where they're headed. But the main task of decoys is to divert the air defense system. That is, this is not involved in combat operations directly, in the application of combat operations. But nevertheless, air defense is in the way. Therefore, if we talk about the figure is about 300. That is, it is practically a 2 to 3 day production of Russians. But since they do send some of the drones every day, so it can be said, weekly production and accumulation. Somewhere around 50 drones a day they set aside for stockpiling, and once a week they send out in a wave. They can do that is, strike drones, about 300 that are going to targets. Sometimes some are paralleled, or there are 5, 7, 10 drones going in on one target. This means the routers are working, that is, they map out the routes and upload them into the brains of a dozen drones, and targeting for a dozen drones, and they then accomplish that task. Although lately they have been generally scaling the use of this level of defeat means to one point, as they did yesterday towards Lutsk. So, the issue here is not so much about quantity as it is about the ability to route and use the drones themselves. This is where the Russians have a problem, and it may not even be fully solvable because there are no more targets. There are fewer targets, so they just increase the number of drones as such by 1 point. This should simply be counteracted. There is a countermeasure mechanism, an increase in the density of frontal air defense in order to prevent large numbers of Russian drones from entering our territory at all, let alone entering the facility as such. And there is the opportunity. We have to make a political military decision. And the Russians are producing, they will produce. They can produce hundreds, thousands of decoys. It's not a problem, especially for Russians. But in conjunction with the Chinese recently, there are already confirmed facts that more than half of the nodes and units are Chinese in Garan, not to mention Furia, that is almost pure Chinese production. The Russians can still produce about 150-200 of such drones per day, no more than that. In order to increase production, they are the ones who need to build about as many plants as they already have. They have one large plant near Yelabuga, a slightly smaller plant near Izhevsk. Chinese are building large unit assembly plants in North Korea, but they are already operating at maximum capacity. Therefore, we do not expect a sharp increase in production of Duran 2, Duran 3 together with the Chinese at the moment, because there are no plants. If the Chinese directly get involved in the supply, then yes, they can add more than 100 per day. And then we may see up to 1,000 strike drones in the sky as well. But again, it's one thing to put 1,000 drones in the air, and another thing to route target designations, additional reconnaissance of targets. So it's a whole process that won't get to the level of 1,000 targets per day. There simply aren't that many of them, unless it's a genocidal mission, that is, unless it's peaceful homes after all, or approaches to settlements or cities with a high density of compact civilian population. This is pure genocide, although you can expect that from the Russians. And now they're basically picking some positions just for the genocidal strike. We're seeing that too, especially on the capital. Lately there have been pure genocidal strikes and lots of drones and missiles. So nothing can be ruled out completely, at least. One must understand a certain sequence of actions and opportunities. I have already said how we can counteract this. It is necessary to densify the frontal air defense, a kind of stack in the rear of Ukraine, that is, to put fighter jets below light engine aircraft, below helicopters, and on the ground anti-aircraft missile systems of medium-long range. This is the standard set of a dense air defense system. This is the only way we can close ourselves off at the moment. And in order to ensure security from production, that is, to destroy production, it is necessary to start with China. And by economic pressure on China, by directly destroying the production sites of components and assemblies for these drones. So it's a whole process, not to mention hitting Russian production in Izhevsk and Yelabuga. Although again, we have to think about destroying or trying to destroy factories in North Korea because most likely some of the North Korean drones, they will also, under the guise of some Garans or whatever they call them, will come to the front line. Roman, regarding mirror responses, you've been objectively talking about this for a long time, particularly about responses targeting Moscow, the capital of Russia. Information is emerging from pro-Russian military bloggers that the Russians are panicking, saying that Ukraine will launch 1,000 drones and dozens of missiles toward Moscow. We don't actually know any official information, it's just panic and information from Russian propaganda, from Russian military bloggers. Roman, what can you say here? To what extent do Russians really expect some strikes on Moscow, and not only your analysis, please? What military facilities could theoretically be the targets of these attacks? How do we, by analyzing the number of drones that come in, knowing how many they produce, we can predict, let's say, a weekly attack of a few hundred drones? If they produce 150, 200, and 5,100 come in every day, it means that somewhere 5,100 are stored, and in a certain time a wave of 500, 700 drones will come in. That's the predictive ability that everyone has. Anyone, at least a mathematician, not to mention military specialists. And Russians, especially bloggers, they feel that lately we have been operating dozens, not hundreds, of drones, which means that hundreds of drones are being stored. And in principle, they expect from the point of view of predictive ability, they have the correct deductions. Hundreds of drones are predicted to enter at any one point. Optimally, if I were asked where to send 1,000 Ukrainian drones, so of course to refinery. To refineries, that is to burn the Russian carbon dioxide that is fueling this war. If we burn down the Russian oil and gas complex, there will be nothing to buy North Korean soldiers, to buy equipment, ammunition, and to put even Russian recruits into service. Among other things, they are also on a certain financial cushion. So that's the first place these drones need to go. We'll see where they go. But in terms of predictive abilities, of course, Russian bloggers definitely have them, especially in the 12th year of the war. Plus missiles, of course. Missiles, if they show up, send them as far as possible to the maximum radius. You need to know which missiles are meant. And based on the statements of Ukraine's military and political leadership, we already have ballistics on the way out somewhere. We've been waiting for it somewhere, honestly, for quite a few years now, but it will appear someday. And when it appears, with a range of 500 kilometers, it will go to Moscow. Ballistics penetrate Moscow air defense. Therefore, from the point of view of analytics, Russian bloggers correctly put analytical notes, one might say, on the table of Russian listeners. The question of action, that is, the question of the number of means of defeat we have, we will see shortly. In one of the programs after a large-scale strike on Russian military facilities, which are Moscow, decision-making centers, the same Kremlin or military facilities in Moscow, the Moscow region, including oil refineries that produce diesel, aviation kerosene, and gasoline for the Russian army, being direct participants in the invasion of Ukraine. They must therefore be destroyed. Absolutely, Roman, we agree with you here. Good forecast. We've noted this, and continuing the topic of possible missiles that will soon strike the territory of temporarily occupied Russia. German Chancellor Merz recently made a statement saying that diplomatic tools to end the war in Ukraine have run out, and the fighting will only intensify. Chancellor Merz said so. Roman, a question about Taurus. Is it correct to expect that we will have these missiles in the near future? And another question on a more analytical context, what does it mean? What is your understanding of these words? There is no end to what could not be. There is no political solution to the war that Russia unleashed. Why? Because they won't leave our territory on their own. We will not give our territory to the Russians. It can only be returned militarily. Whoever thought of resolving this politically will not be able to accomplish such a task. If we have the task of restoring, and we do, it is Ukrainian society, the Ukrainian army, that has the task of restoring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of our state. It can only be done militarily. No other way. Even economic pressure targets Russia's hydrocarbon industry through military action. There is no other option either. Sanctions pressure on them at the moment does not work, as they bypass the SWIFT bans by paying with cryptocurrencies. And the Russian shadow fleet, about 1,000 tankers, which are escorted, especially by military vessels or military planes, does not even give the possibility to predict a stop by such methods. Economically and politically, the Russian economy, a stop that will lead to its collapse. So only military mechanisms. So Merz basically said the same thing twice. Nothing new. And these actions were not political, they could not be a priori. Therefore, only military. The question to what extent the same Germany will participate in the military mechanisms of restoring our territorial integrity is a question for Merz. Just by Merz, there is hope that this chancellor will fulfill the main task that Germany has already chosen for itself at the moment to build the defense of Europe. That is an economic center, a financial center, a production center. And this is already clear, visible. Naturally, we are embedded in the overall security system. That's just the rhetoric. We hear it all the time. That is, in this direction of changing the rhetoric of practically all, except for the sweet couple Fico and Orban, practically all European leaders in the direction that Ukraine is the fundamental cornerstone of Europe's defense against the Sino-Russian horde that attacked Europe more than a decade ago. Now that's a big plus. And of course, Merz here at this point confirms at least that rhetoric. He doesn't just talk, they do. That's what the Germans like about it. They do more than talk, unlike all the other some, including European leaders who do more talking than doing. Roman, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your analytics. Roman Svitan, Ukrainian Reserve Colonel and pilot instructor, explains key topics daily. Vladyslav Solovyov was with you. Friends, right now, give this video a like, write your comments on the topics we talked about regarding Trump's statements. It's interesting what you think. Right now, write your emotions and your thoughts about this. About a possible attack on Moscow is also interesting to read. Don't forget to sign up, and we'll see you on the air on Channel 24.